at our Zoom screen. We have commissioners joining us, Commissioner Chair MacArthur, Vice Chair Halova, Commissioner Pearmine, Commissioner Warren, Commissioner Jacobson, and Commissioner Lilac. Commissioner Gerard Sandoval will not be able to join us today. Thank you. Chair MacArthur?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Appreciate that. And as was mentioned, Commissioner Sandoval is out today, and also Director Rue is out today as well. So, but we are in very good hands with Deputy Director Green. So, any questions you might have for either of them could certainly go to her. I just want to take a moment as we're waiting sort of for Carol to come on board. First of all, we've changed the order of things a little bit. Oh, Carol is here, so maybe we just go right to her. But we changed the order a little bit for the audience as well as you folks. We are doing the commission business first and CIAC second because Carol needs to go over to Ways and Means and talk about DLCD budget issues, obviously. So to give her as much bandwidth as possible, I just might go ahead and start agenda item number 9, which is now the first one of the day, and turn it over to Carol.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Carol Bobette, and I'm the Administrative Services Manager for DLCD. And I am here to present the report for the Budget and Management Subcommittee, which met on Tuesday of this week. We reviewed the financials, the financial report ending January 31st of 2021. The positive news from that is that we continue to hold on to a savings or a projected savings that we think we'll have as of June 30th, which obviously, or I would say only obviously to those of you who know the government cycles well, but that is the end of our biennium. And so it has been an eventful one, but things are looking positive as we wrap up. Some of the positive movement that we had most recently is that we have been able to recover more revenue from a couple of different sources than we anticipated that we would. And obviously that helps drive us a little bit to the positive. And I would just pause briefly at that point and ask if there are any questions about the financial part of the report.
Great, thank you. And just for reference, it's attachment A of agenda item 9 that Carol is referring to. So questions, comments from commissioners?
Okay.
I don't hear any.
Well, let's go ahead and sail on through and talk a little bit about budget development activities. Since I gave my report previously, we have presented our agency profile as well as our budget request officially to the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee, the Natural Resources Subcommittee. The final meeting for that actually happened on February 22nd. And so that marks kind of an important point that we've passed in this budget build process. The next major point that we're looking at as far as the core budget bill for the agency for the 21-23 biennium would be the revenue forecast that will come out in May of this year. That really is kind of the final important input point, after which the legislature knows how much money they have to work with. And so many of the negotiations for what our new budget will look like as far as the detail is concerned may be discussed only very late in the session. But beyond that, revenue forecasts to this point have been surprisingly not as terrible and even positive as we thought, given that we're coming out of a pandemic. So I would just say that that concludes the material part of the report that I had to share with you today. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Carol, for everything you do in addition to the presentation.
You are very welcome.
We feel like we're in good hands. I don't see any comments or questions, so go off and do good things at Ways and Means. Great. Okay, so I wanted to open it up, though, go back to the broader commission business topic. I know the only thing that was listed on there was the budget, but I want to make sure that commissioners know they can either call in advance to include an agenda item on here for something that is under commission business that you want to discuss with the full commission, or certainly raise something just right now or at any meeting. So we often don't take time to really talk to one another during this time, and I want to make sure you have that space to do that. So Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. And I wasn't sure when to ask this question. I'm just curious if we have a sense when we may meet in person as a commission, if it's as early as July or if it's September. And I only ask just for travel planning purposes and whatnot, just given that our schedules are all busy, and it takes a bit more time to travel, which is great. It just for planning purposes, I was just curious if there's any sense of that yet.
Makes total sense, and I can look maybe to Kirsten, Deputy Director Green. I don't have any idea. I was thinking September. I was hopeful about September. I didn't think July was going to work for the vaccination schedules, but what is your thought?
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. Vice Chair Hilova, Commissioners, Kirsten Green here. Chair MacArthur said Deputy Director. Standing in for Jim today, we don't know. Chair MacArthur is exactly right. As we understand, and Jim might say if he were here, that really we're hearing from DAS September in terms of movement, and we don't know what kind of movement that will be, of course. This is, things are changing quickly with a push to get everyone vaccinated by May. But short answer, Commissioner Lilac, sorry, but we just don't know quite yet. But I think we all want to be together in person as soon as possible.
Yes, yeah, I would really like to see in person, especially some of the newer commissioners who I've never really met in person. So looking forward to that day. So we'll kind of, in our brains, maybe target September-ish or so for that that reunion, if you will.
If you, Chair MacArthur, if I could, I would put your hearts and minds on November.
Oh,
but September we should be getting ready. But possibly
okay.
I would if I were a betting person, and I'm not. I would move towards November with a little bit more certainty.
Well, it occurred to me, and this is just about me, but I became chair in January of 2020, and I've only had one meeting in person, and then it went directly to Zoom. So I'm really I'm termed out in a year, so I'm hoping to have just a few meetings where I can actually see all of you in person. I'm an extrovert, and so this is an okay environment, but I really like to see you in everything else. So we'll look at November.
But we'll push for September.
Push
for September.
Okay.
I hear you. Yeah.
Great. Commissioner Pearmine, you had your hand up.
That will also be my last meeting, so I would love to be in person as well.
Oh, September or July?
September.
Oh, gosh.
But that's okay. If we don't want to put our lives at risk or each other's lives at risk for that.
Yes, I hope so.
But I didn't raise my hand to say that. I raised my hand to ask the question, and I'd be interested in other commissioners' thoughts on this as well. About the opportunity for the commission to do some training related to diversity, equity, inclusion at some level. And so whether it's external, we have access to training, or if we had a discussion and had some pre-reading and TED Talks and podcasts, I think that from my experience, having a common language and shared understanding around these topics is essential. And that, anyway, I just wanted to, I'm interested to hear from other commissioners if you feel like that would be valuable, but that for me and my experience has really shifted the way that I see the world. And I feel like it would be something I'd be interested in.
Great question, commissioners.
Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Pearmine, I think that's such a great idea, because otherwise I just feel like I'm always learning trial by fire. And as I mentioned yesterday, with how much I learned from our committee, and the diversity of our committee right now is great, but to actually have some sort of formalized training, that's a great idea. I completely support it. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a super idea. It's a matter of figuring out the right combination of things. But others want to kind of chime in, both in terms of the concept, but also in terms of what's the best way to do that. We've had that wonderful, for those of you that were here at the commission in Tigard about a year and a half ago, I think it was. It was a great present. The CIAC convened a group of folks that gave us specific insights into some work program items on our agenda. And it was I just learned so much from that. And it wasn't just a presentation, it was an interaction. So I'm not saying that's the only forum, but it is a helpful thing in the context of a commission, especially being virtual, but in person too. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of other ways. And I know didn't we take the equity and diversion training? That was one element of that. That's important. And then I'd be open to other ideas that you might have about how that, how to have training with a commission setting.
Chair?
Yes, please.
All right, I didn't even know my thing was muted. I would second what Commissioner Paramine said. I think my first maybe my only formal training in diversity, equity, and inclusion actually was with the City of Portland when I was on the Adjustments Committee. And it was a really long time ago, like before it was even a thing that people did, I guess. And it just, it's like a framework. Like when you learn about sustainability, there was some point in my life, somebody said, this is what sustainability is, and these are the components. And it just kind of gives you a frame of reference, the common language, a way you can talk about these things. And I think it's evolved dramatically since I did that first training, but that set kind of the understanding, I guess, moving forward. And we talked about it at that Tigard meeting, is that we all needed to understand terms and what are we talking about and what are we trying to achieve. So yes, 100%. But whatever training it is, I would personally say that it needs to be one in which we have to do it and not on our own. I think this is a better topic to have interaction with, especially because we want to have it geared toward our profession rather than an abstract concept.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think any kind of training, I would say all the above, though I think that the individual training we do with those little modules, I think that's really good. But I do agree that having different ways to communicate with one another and learn these topics and the common words and framework are really important. So if other commissioners don't have any comments, what I would like to do, and Vice Chair Hulova, you and I have a debrief meeting next Tuesday at 9 with staff, and maybe Deputy Director Green and you and I can talk a little bit about that in that meeting to figure out how to follow through on this great suggestion from Commissioner Paramine. Okay. Thank you. It sounds like you're shaking your head. Yes, Kirsten, great.
All right, thank you, Chair McCarthy. I just didn't want to interrupt. That is welcome, and we certainly appreciate it. And I'm sure Jim would be, very positive and favorable as well. Thank you, Commissioner Paramine, for raising it. Thank you. So we can debrief next week. I've thoughts, but in the interest of time, why don't we debrief and seek any look back and seek any guidance from Commissioner Paramine as well. I know, and then also Katie Leahy and our DEI committee. But thank you so much for the suggestion.
Well, and I also, just as a final point, I do see value in having a commission discussion in this setting or in person, because I think it highlights the importance of the issue for DLCD staff and the public, and it signals that we are in fact taking it seriously and wanting to make sure we infuse our work with those principles. So I think that's important to have it in this setting as well. With that, are there other items that commissioner members want to raise before we go on to CIAC? Okay, looks like none, and I'm not getting any little text. So I think we'll close out this agenda item. Thank you. Thanks for the great suggestion and discussion. Okay, we'll move back to agenda item number 8, and that's the Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, the CIAC. And we have committee members as well as our commission liaison, Katie Permine, are here to talk a little bit about the strategy for recruiting new members, as well as seeking our approval of their work program for 2021. And I think at this point, I turn it over initially to Deputy Director Green. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair MacArthur. Vice Chair Helova, members of the commission, Kirsten back here again. I'm so pleased to present the CIAC work plan, and I'm just remembering I'm supposed to bring up the PowerPoint, which I'm going to do. And welcome and introduce our committee members. Let me share this, forgive me, in Zoom. Okie doke. So you mentioned Tigard it was actually September 2019 we were together. You see the full complement, nearly the full complement of our commission pictured, and so much has happened since that time. You see Chair Faust there presenting. They had pulled together an esteemed panel. Chair MacArthur, you were just speaking to that. We had one of the founders of the Environmental Justice Task Force there. And just, Dr. Zapata, really great presentation, local government representative. So we look forward to engaging with you in that way, not only in person, but in a more informal context. I've been pleased to step in for Sadie Carney, who is on rotation. So you'll see before you today a work plan that we think reflects the capacities of the agency and the current condition. But nevertheless, we are all, over the top enthusiastic about best practices for community engagement. And we really appreciate Commissioner Permine's support for the committee's work. If it's still all right, I will open and Commissioner Permine will close. And then I know that our member Vice Chair, Mr. Zechariah Heck, has to leave at 9:45, so be conscious of time. Chair Steve Faust has been chairing this committee for quite some time. We're so grateful. He's actually staying on to help recruit a full panel. And then member Leah Rausch has been on for some time too. Ms. Steve is a consultant in comprehensive planning and development with 3J. These are volunteers. Mr. Zechariah Heck is with ODOT now after service in Central Oregon, I believe, with the city of Bend. And, or was it Deschutes County, Commissioner Lelag? It was Deschutes County. And then, so he's now with ODOT in their climate office, which is great, but I know a loss for the county. And then Ms. Leah Rausch is a consultant in natural hazards with Integrated Solutions Consulting, having started on CIEC as a student representative from the University of Oregon. So pleased to have them here today to present. I'm going to get out of the way. As was mentioned, we'll be, as Chair MacArthur mentioned, we'll present the work plan and seek your approval, and then would love to receive your guidance on recruitment strategies. We're currently recruiting, and you'll hear more about that. So for members of the commission who may not have been with us in 2019 in Tigard, which was really a bright moment, it was partly so bright because the CIAC had just updated the legacy, putting the people in planning document. But to loop back for everybody, just, all commissioners have so much going on all the time. We have statutory authority and direction to have a Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, and their work centers on the statewide planning goal 1, which is to help ensure widespread community engagement in all phases of the planning process. We are fortunate to be able to use some liberty with the words. Chair Faust shared with me that I think former Commission Chair Litz encouraged us to just go ahead and use community engagement, even though the word citizen involvement is hardwired into the statute and the goals, and it would take 10 hearings around the state with considerable effort to change just those 2 words. So we haven't quite been able to mount that yet. We are eager so to do. And the commission, we'll see kind of the policy agenda after we come out of the legislature. That could be a topic on there, but it's a very crowded agenda. We can take that up later, but we all bristle at the term, because we don't want to propose to exclude anybody, whether it's immigrant refugees or folks who are undocumented working here and supporting the everyday livelihood of Americans. So the CIAC's work is implemented at the local government level. So local governments each are obliged to have an adopted citizen involvement participation plan. And as we've been discussing yesterday, and the Commission knows so well, and we have counselors and commissioners and staff on that serve in local governments, that is where the action really happens. So a lot of the CIAC's work is to kind of push down and through, cohere and push down and through best practices for local government practice. I feel like, Chair Faust, I think I was going to hand this over to you at this point so you could share the good work that you all have done. Is that right?
That's
Forgive
correct.
me if I'm surprising you. Okay, thank you. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director Green, and thank you, Commissioners, for, as always, for making some time for us in your busy schedule. We really appreciate it. As Deputy Director Green stated, it's been quite a while since we were all in person, although that was a very rewarding, I think, meeting the last time we were all together. So again, my name is Steve Faust, Chair of the CIAC, and we are happy to share with you what we've been doing over the past year and a half since that time, and what we have prepared for a work plan for 2021 year. So among the things that we accomplished 2019-2020, one was awarding an ACE Award, Achievement in Community Engagement, to the city of Estacada for their active transportation plan. And you'll see in our work plan, we look forward to reinitiating our annual awarding of that award. As Deputy Director Green mentioned, finalizing an update to the Putting the People in Planning guidebook was a key item of our most recent work plans. We're very pleased to have worked through that. Providing guidance on the policy agenda and climate rulemaking, facilitating the panel discussion that's been mentioned of best practices for community engagement at that commission meeting in September 2019. Presenting on engaging community, we facilitated a panel discussion at the Oregon APA conference on engaging communities during a pandemic, and then reviewing public participation guidelines with the commission. Let's go to the next slide. So over the past few months, we've been working to prepare a proposed work plan for 2021. As you can see with the three of us, myself, Zechariah, and Leah, we are currently operating without a full committee, and therefore our top work plan item there is to recruit a full committee that reflects Oregon's diversity. And when I'm done with my few slides here, Leah and Zechariah are going to go into more detail on what that means. As I mentioned, after a year off, we are looking forward to awarding an ACE Award again this year and soliciting applications from communities across Oregon. We will be supporting the Goal 20 rule writing process, advising on agency rulemaking initiatives, ensuring that there are sessions on community engagement at annual conferences. And then, as always, I think the core of our work is sharing best practices and serving as a resource to Oregon communities as resources allow. And
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, please do,
Okay.
Vice Chair.
What is insurance sessions or on annual conferences? What does that mean? Sorry, I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I mentioned briefly in our accomplishments that we submitted and then facilitated a panel discussion on community engagement best practices during the pandemic for the Oregon APA conference. And we would just like to continue to have a presence, not just at that conference, but other relevant conferences, possibly the International Association of Public Participation and other conferences, just making sure that dialogue around community engagement and best practices continues. And we're constantly reviewing and updating best practices, case studies, examples from places around the state, just keeping the dialogue going. And always happy to, if there are other avenues or specific conferences that people would like to see us look into, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
And I guess before we go to this slide, if we could just go back to the previous slide, I just wanted to see, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about that first work plan item, but I wanted to see if there are any questions about the other items on this list before we continue.
Questions? Doesn't appear to be any at this point. Thanks, Steve. Continue on.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is our schedule for 2021. Yeah, I wanted to see if it went into 2022. And as you can see, item number 2 is recruitment. And that really is going to be our focus in the coming months before we move on to those other work plan items that I mentioned. Next slide. So currently we have 3 active members all here today, and vacancies in districts 1, 2, 4, 5, and 1 at-large position. Next slide. And just if people, just a reminder of the geography of that. So we're looking at, northwest part of the state, the large eastern swath of the state, and the Central Valley and southern part of the state as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leah, and she's going to talk a little bit about what we mean and provide some contextual information about reflecting Oregon's diversity. Leah?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you, commissioners, again, for having us here this morning. So as Steve shared in that work plan proposal, our key objective for 2021 is really to have a CIAC that better reflects the diversity of Oregon. So over the past several months, we've really worked with staff and Deputy Director Green to kind of focus on creating a thoughtful recruitment strategy. And so to do that, we started with the established DLCD priority populations, which, as you know, are grounded in the governor's equity framework, and laid those alongside some of the current demographics of the state. And then using this information, we refined our proposed kind of priority populations for recruitment. And in addition to the priority groups, which I'll share with you in a moment, we want to make sure we also strike a balance between urban and rural Oregon perspectives, as well as gender. So this slide is just showing DLCD's priority populations, which are the following. So Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, people with limited English proficiency, people living with a disability, and people without stable or safe housing, or folks who are houseless. So it's an essential part of public involvement, especially in planning, that we're representative of kind of the breadth and diversity of our state. So in addition to these priority populations, we wanted to look at current demographics, and I'll go through these kind of quickly here. So we looked at age and wealth, recognizing that the median age is just under 40 and the median household income is just under $60,000 a year. We looked at race, ethnicity, and language access. So again, considering both communities of color, as well as the nearly 16% of residents in Oregon who speak a language other than English, and 5.5% that are not US citizens. And then, of course, really important for inclusive planning is housing tenure. So we wanted to recognize that more than 38% of Oregonians are renters. Excuse me. So taking those kind of initial DLCD priority populations and considering some of these demographic trends in the state, we've landed on the following recommended priority populations for recruitment. And we certainly want to get your feedback on these priorities. I'll let you kind of read them on the screen here, but first I'll hand it off to Zechariah, Vice Chair Zechariah Heck, to talk a little bit more about our recruitment strategy and next steps.
Thank you, Leah, and Chair MacArthur, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. So I'm going to focus in on our recruitment strategy, and very interested in hearing any feedback that the commissioners might have on how we can get up to a full committee here. So far, we've had a government delivery blast through staff. We've done a press release, emailed community-based organizations, and did some personal invitations and follow-up phone calls as well. Next up, we plan on continuing to reach out to people individually, hopefully do another government delivery email notification, and then reminding people as much as we can about the important work that this committee is doing and just general recruitment. Next slide. We've created a shared spreadsheet where we've identified some key organizations that will hopefully target or relate to the priority populations that you've seen in previous slides. This is an example of the organizations that we've identified, and can certainly share this with commissioners if there's an interest in reviewing our full list. Next slide. New this time around is an actual online form, which is pretty slick. Kudos to DLCD staff for getting this done and having an online version where a member of the public can go on to this website and enter their information directly on the website without printing out a form or what have you. But I do I do understand that hard copies are available if we have a request to provide such a hard copy. And an important note on this online form, we are have distinct questions about demographic, race, income, gender, and abilities, again, to really highlight our goals, our target priority populations. Next slide.
Zach, before you go from that slide, Zachariah, if I may, I'd like to ask a question. I can't see I think that's your online form is a great idea. I'm wondering if you're also asking about their topic areas of interest. And I mean, I'm assuming there's more to this form than just what we see on the screen. And the reason I'm asking about that is it seems I'm really enjoying the robust way you're going about recruiting members for the CIAC. It occurred to me that perhaps that's also a way to bring people into the fold that might be eligible for a future RAC. Or a webinar to include them on our mailing lists for various topics, just if they show an interest in being on this committee as well as representing the land use program and DLCD, I'd like to bring them into the fold. So I'm just wondering what you have is that a possibility, and could this be used for that purpose?
Yeah, great question, Chair MacArthur. And I do recall that part of the online form has a section on tell us about your interest, your background, why are you interested in serving. But Deputy Director Green, do you have anything else to add about whether we can include their email addresses or for future opportunities?
Thank you, Vice Chair. We absolutely can and will and want to capture some of those folks who may not be selected. It's really invaluable that people are even expressing interest. So you're right, Chair MacArthur. We are collecting, we will have their contact information, but as well, we're asking what moved them, why they're interested in joining, and then also a few other specific questions about other perspectives they might bring, whether it's with equity or environmental justice or other areas. I could go to the form and look at the whole list and walk you through the form if you'd like. It's not that long, but as Vice Chair Heck has said, we're pretty proud of it. Pretty proud of David Michael's work there in the Information Resources team. So I'd be happy to walk you through the form too, so we could see. But in the interest of time, we'll turn it back over to Vice Chair Heck. If that's all right.
Yes, I don't need to walk through the form. I just was curious. So thank you for the response. Vice Chair Heck.
Yeah, and I'll pause, and I saw Commissioner Lilac had his hand
Oh,
up.
I'm
Any
sorry, I didn't
questions
see that. Commissioner Lilac, thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Chair MacArthur and Vice Chair Heck. It's great to have you here. The other question I have, I just went to the website to begin to look for the form to fill out online, and I didn't see it. And I'll just ask the question in any event. I think these are great questions we're asking and we're discussing. Are we also asking if they own or rent their own home? Given that we've identified that as being an important issue as well, just so we can have that diversity?
My understanding is yes, but I'll look to Deputy Director Green to confirm that as well.
We definitely should be if we're not, and I hope we are. I'm sorry, I don't have a printout.
Yes,
Commissioner
we are.
Lilac, thank you. Thanks, Ingrid.
Yes.
Shouts out to Ingrid, for whom I did not introduce earlier. Forgive me, Chair MacArthur and members of the commission. We wouldn't be anywhere in this work without Ingrid Caudill holding us together as a committee staff person. So thanks, Ingrid, for chiming in there. Okay. Thanks, Commissioner Lilac. Vice Chair Heck, back to you, I think.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, I'll take that opportunity to just recognize Ingrid's help. Super helpful, and definitely makes our committee function. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, applications are due April 18th, so about a month away. Then staff will consider applications, and I believe, or at least do the first cut, and then bring in CIAC committee members to review applications as well. We'll conduct interviews as necessary, and then have a list of recommended committee member candidates for commission review during in May. And with that, I'll turn it over to our commission liaison, Commissioner Pearmine, to see if she has any comments.
Well, every time I get to see your work, my heart just glows. And I feel so grateful to be a part of a community that cares this much about the program, the planning program itself, and then, our community at large. So I want to, take the moment to first just recognize how much time and energy and the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion that this team brings to the work is extraordinary. So just really want to pause and honor all of you, and also just a lot of gratitude to Ingrid as well for keeping us organized, and to Kirsten for your leadership. And I'll just reemphasize that because we don't have a lot of staff resource we were really pinched. The fact that this committee has stepped in to do the kind of work that they're doing adds resource to our work. And I just, it's something that the work plan is absolutely doable, and that's where we can really focus. So we can't really go beyond that based on the resourcing that we have. Let's see, what else? I'd say for the commission and the public, it looks like we have one attendee, and maybe people will watch this recording, but our work is to do recruitment, and our work is to think about who in our communities are often not at the table. And the point of working with people, with diverse perspectives is you get the best work, and you have insights you would have never considered before. So in your communities, in those regions, I really recommend, doing some outreach, and then we have the at-large member too. So that is all I wanted to say, and happy to answer any questions. I too was a little distracted this COVID year and doing my international development work now, but this committee was strong all the way through, and I'm just so grateful for you all.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearmine. Thanks for being a liaison to this important effort. And thanks to the team and especially Steve. I think you asked to be stepped down quite a while ago because you had already given and given and given. But I really appreciate your leadership because of the history and the breadth of experience you bring to this topic, both in your consulting work as well as the volunteer effort with us. So thank you. I was just wondering, I have a question though, and that is, well, it's maybe a thought. It's maybe it was COVID, maybe it was attrition. I don't think we have to go into the reasons why we lost 5 members of the committee over the past year and a half, whatever it was. I'm sure there were all good reasons. I guess we don't need to go over it now, but I was thinking, are there some principles of or to retain people? Are there some thoughts that you have about how to retain members, to honor them if that's what is needed, to make sure it's well staffed? I guess we don't need to discuss it here, but at your next meeting, it'd be helpful for you to discuss that. And then I'd like to see that list or a conversation about that at the May meeting when you come back. I really want to know if there's something else the commission can do to really support this really valuable effort. And I think there's a couple of you that have your hands up, and Commissioner Lilac and then Commissioner Jacobson.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. And I just want to start by saying thank you so much to Chair Faust, Vice Chair Heck, and Leah. You should have a special title as well. All 3 of you, your commitment and dedication it's just extraordinary. And I really, really want to thank you all very much for what you've done and continue to do to support the CIAC. A couple of questions and thoughts. One is, and I'll just get all these out there and then we can see what responses there are. Have we sent these recruitments to, for example, applicants to our Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities committee, just as given that we have such a great group of people there that they've already demonstrated their interest in serving, and maybe they would be interested in continuing in a different capacity. Is there anything that we as commissioners can do? I've sent the email to, I'll just say it, kind of the usual suspects, county planning directors and planning commission and whatnot, but I think we need to go far, far, far beyond that. So are there people that we can help recruit or contact that you think would be really valuable to include? So for example, maybe it is one of those members on the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities group. Happy to do that if so. Sorry, just a couple more quick ones. I don't know if we provide a stipend to people to participate. We do, thank you. That was just a question I had. I'm just because this is a new topic for me, other than I remember when our Vice Chair Heck applied. I supported his application when he was with Deschutes County, completing nearly 5 years of just extraordinary service for us. I just don't recall who appoints, if it's the commission that appoints these or if it's the department. The commission does. And then just finally, my last comment point is I really appreciate your wanting to continue to discuss, actually 2 more points, sorry, to share best practices at conferences. And I think ICMA, International City County Management Associations, is in Portland this fall. That may be too soon, but maybe you have something to share. And then just my final point is I was so pleased to see that you're already thinking about Goal 20, because that is going to be such an important topic that we all undertake. And the CIAC is going to be so important in helping establish what those best processes are and how do we engage the community and our residents on all this. So sorry, a lot of thoughts there, but wanted to get them all out. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the CIAC members want to respond to any of those? They're all great suggestions.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur, and for your questions and comments, Commissioner Lilac. Really appreciate those. I'll try to touch on a few of them, and then we'll see if other members or Deputy Director Green has anything to add. Regarding what commissioners can do to help out, certainly open to many ideas. Possibly if there are certain groups, maybe Vice Chair Heck mentioned our follow-up phone calls and personal contacts. Maybe if we do identify certain groups or individuals that we want to establish contact with that we haven't been able to, and one of you has a connection there, that might be one possible way that you could support our efforts. There was a question about whether or not there's a stipend for CIAC members. The answer there is not. We are volunteers, happily volunteering our time for this important topic and effort throughout the state. And then the comments about ICMA and Goal 20. Yeah, we're excited about the opportunity to support the efforts around Goal 20. And we can look into ICMA and see if there is an opportunity for us to present at that conference. I know there's probably plenty of League of Cities, probably plenty of others that we can start to establish a list of. And I should be clear that it's good to get a big list of these types of opportunities, because we're not really talking about just one of the three of us or a CIAC member presenting, but really working with others that we know, kind of like the panel discussion that we facilitated, really trying to encourage others to speak as well. So Zechariah or Leah, do you have anything that you want to add?
I'll add a few follow-ups there. Thank you, Steve. So I like the idea about ICMA conference. Thanks for sharing that, Commissioner Lilac. And in terms of, I'd like Deputy Director Green to talk about stipends, because I believe while we are all currently volunteers, I know that it's under discussion about the possibility of providing stipends, particularly to groups that would be the difference in them being able to serve or not.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. If I may, Kirsten here. Thanks, Vice Chair Heck. This is true. What Steve said is true, and what Zechariah said, which Vice Chair Heck, Chair and Vice Chair have said, is that we have not to date, heretofore we have not, and Chair MacArthur will take you up on your offer to come back in May and talk about the changes that are in place, and we think the changes that have really led to the attrition and the difficulty recruiting from particularly non-Valley areas of the state to CIC. There's a number of structural changes that we have made, and that have been kind of forced on us by the pandemic, e.g. Zoom and online engagement without folks having to travel. Oh, another one is the financial support. So I think I cleared this with Director Rue before we started to promote it, but we did ask, as we did in the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking, we ask in the forum if folks belong to a community-based organization that could provide financial support if needed, that we could work with to provide financial support if needed. So through that method, we have had one inquiry. We are open to the discussion, particularly in the new biennium, of some sort of modest but very important financial support to help people compensate people for their really lived experience that they'd be bringing to this, but also as kind of priority populations, and then also to just make it feasible, whether it be in their workday or their volunteer time, or if they're a student or low income, renters, et cetera. It can be really beneficial to have some additional financial support to as a vehicle to help lend their lived experience and community-based expertise. So we are hoping to do that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just make one final comment, kind of building off of what Deputy Director Green just said, in that in doing recruitment in your regions or in your communities, I think thinking about, beyond, planning directors, planning commissioners, kind of, as I think you said, the typical suspects, community-based organizations, organizing groups, tenants' rights organizations. I think all of those types of groups are great to kind of broaden the perspectives of our committee, but also who can help to facilitate some of that lived experience and perspective, that knowing that we might not be able to get kind of individuals that aren't kind of represented by or participant staff of some of these groups. So thinking about who those organizations are in your community and reaching out directly to them would be greatly helpful.
Thank you.
And then Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Jacobson had her hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, excuse me, Commissioner Jacobson, please.
Thank you. So just 2 suggestions for additional groups to maybe do some outreach to that could help with recruiting. One is legal aid services. One of the largest thing that legal aid services does is tenant cases. They do some other stuff too, but that's a large part of their workload. So if they could be sent some materials or maybe, recruit through clients they're working with, I think that would be a good avenue for people. And then additionally, I would really encourage some connection and some outreach to extension offices. They usually have very large networks of people they work with across the diverse sort of programming. For example, in Lincoln County, Extension and the county have a Juntos en Colaboración group that we work with the Latinx community. And the whole point is to be better connected between government and the Latinx community. It kind of sprung out of COVID-19, but we talk about all sorts of things in those groups. So out to Extension, I think would be great for them to send out through their networks. And then, like I said, legal aid would be another one.
Great suggestions. Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Halova.
Thank you. I had just a question about one of the slides, mainly because I didn't have time to digest it. Is there a way to go back to look at the slide? It was the one where it broke down race percentages in Oregon. I just.
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna try again there.
And then I.
That's 2019 data that Sadie had prepared. So I'm just gonna. I didn't have a chance to kind of refresh it, Vice Chair Halova. So
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just looking for black, and then I got confused because don't think isn't it normally categorized by?
So we can let me reshare that. Let me redo and reshare this. Thank you for pointing that out. What we know, so I would say so I apologize, that's not on the screen, and neither is, Native American or Native Alaskan. So this is this one small snip of what ACS provides easily, and it's incomplete. Thank you for pointing that out. What we know about people who identify as, African American and Black in Oregon is a suppressed number, not just because of reporting, but because it wasn't even legal to be Black in Oregon for much of Oregon's history. It's a shameful part of our history. So community members who identify as Black and African American are not a statistically large portion of most areas of the state, we know that they are a priority population for this agency and the commission, as well as Native American and Native Alaskan. So I'm sorry for that slide being in error and incomplete, Vice Chair.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. There's just a certain way I'm used to seeing the reporting also, with the category. So when I looked at it, it just threw me off. Yeah. It's like something's missing from this.
Of course it is.
And then the other thing is I noticed, one of the priority populations is people experiencing homelessness. And I was just having a hard time thinking of somebody actually being on the committee that's experiencing homelessness, considering what they might be going through in their regular life. So I'm just pointing out that I assumed it's a person that has knowledge or insight or works within communities of people experiencing homelessness, and then that link to the subsidy part, like if we're asking people to be part of the committee that have financial constraints in any way, that has to be considered.
Right, you are. Thank you so much. It is, for example, on the housing ratch, which you so well kind of were the liaison to, the sole active liaison from commission last year. Thank you. Of course, former chair, our former chair was on there, but you carried a lot of water on that. You remember Laquita Lanford, who was from via the Portland State Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative, who was able to be a financial, we were able to do a contract with that organization, but also Laquita, represents and is working on the Afro Village project. So which would serve folks who are homeless. And I can't recall whether Laquita self-identifies as ever having been homeless, but I haven't never pressed the point. But it is a box that people check when they're doing their demographics, if they've if they've ever experienced or been been in transition like that. And it's frankly more of us than we would ever really realize when you think about it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I guess the other thing was, since we were talking about sending this notice out to different people, the Rules Advisory Committee for the housing work is huge.
Yes.
Especially the TAC included. And that'd be a great group to
thank you.
To say, hey, thank you for your service.
Yes.
We're recruiting for this position.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And Commissioner Lilac had asked if we had sent to the full climate friendly and eco communities list. I don't think we have yet, Commissioner Lilac. So thank you both for your helping us remember that what incredible groups those were, and also the TAC. I think among them all, you had 60 or so folks, Vice Chair Halova, on the housing. At least it was at least 60. Yeah,
and I don't know if it's. I'm trying to look and listen at the same time about the application. When I talk to people about recruiting them for any position, my biggest thing is how long is the term and how many hours of commitment you have. And so I always want to just be like upfront, because the super busy people, some people you really want to get on these things are the super busy ones. And so just being like very clear, and not even, people who have other challenges in their life need to know, like, it's 1 hour every month, and that should be kind of like in that application section, it should be like a bolded section, which is like time commitment.
That's right. So why don't we go ahead and make that change? Because I don't think it jumps out, but that's a very good, good suggestion.
1 hour a year, 1 hour a month, 1 hour a week.
That's right. That's right. Here it says committee members must be available for quarterly meetings and have sufficient time.
Like, I don't know what that is. That like 8 hours?
Yeah, exactly. So they're half-day meetings. So we should make that clear. Thank you.
Because most of the time when I'm trying to get people to get involved, I'm like, it's only 1 hour, that's usually.
Exactly.
So, so I can't see that recruiting without that information.
That's fresh in Vice Chair Halova's mind, because when I was recruiting her to be Vice Chair, I told it was 1 hour a year.
I was like, that's not bad.
Exactly. Sold.
She hasn't beaten me up yet, but that's probably coming.
Because you're distant.
It's coming.
It's coming. Yeah, I know. She's waiting till we're in person, I think, to deliver the body blow directly. So I had all great points from commissioners. Thank you. And I just had a placeholder thought, Kirsten. I do think it's really important for us to contemplate changing the name of the committee for all the reasons you described. And so if in fact we get the funding for the Goal 20 work, and you have to go out across the state anyway to get input on that, could we combine the name change to this committee in that process as well? Potentially, just a thought, no need to kind of go into details, but just a thought.
Could I, if I could, Chair MacArthur, on that point, I don't think Palmer's able to listen because he's over at the legislature, but even Palmer would crack a smile to hear your question there, because I've asked it so many times. I said, please, can't we just sneak this in? Please. And in fact, he says, he cautions us. We, in the House Bill 2488, which is the corollary House Bill to Goal 20, the commissioners will hear about just in a little bit. In order to do that, that body of work, that voluminous body of work in basically 18 months to create a new statewide land use planning goal for climate justice, environmental justice, and equity, they've actually proposed in the bill a streamlined goal review process to only 5 meetings. So it wouldn't comply with getting Goal 1 fixed. But I would encourage, and I know Kasaria is listening. I think she's listening. She may have had to step off for a moment. But Ingrid, if you don't mind reminding Kasaria or asking Kasaria to put on, we have a policy. Kasaria has a great policy agenda built for this year, but also kind of our wish list. And I think if it's not on our wish list, we should just keep it on so commissioners can see it when we consider the policy agenda again. It's so very long overdue. It's we need probably a legal interpretation from Mr. Shipsey at some point, whether or not we could hold those 10 hearings across the state via Zoom, which could make it a very simple task as opposed to something that we perceive as quite staff intensive. And then also community intensive. Once you open up hearings, it's a significant undertaking. I would just mention too, it's a detail, but it's an important detail. Most members of the community and those who listen after to these meetings, I can't remember if it was Commissioner Pearman who mentioned, there are folks the majority of folks and staff who listen to the LCDC meetings are listening on Granicus. So we actually don't know, it's not just the panelists and the attendees who are listening today, it is probably a larger listening public that I don't think we know those numbers, but John makes sure that's all running smoothly. We just don't know who all is listening. So we trust that there's other folks listening. And of course, we appreciate everyone's help pushing the word out. Just one last thing, and if I could, Chair MacArthur, in Commissioner Sandoval's absence, he has recommended to us a Latino community organization. It's called the Latino Community Association in Bend. And so, Commissioner Lilac, if you'd like, I'll jointly. It's also run by a U of O Planning, Public Policy, and Management Master's graduate. So I know we all share that in common. So if you don't know them already, I'd be pleased to kind of make a co-introduction so that you could make their acquaintance as well. But they're doing important engagement in the Latino community in the Bend area. It looks like with a decent sized staff. So we need to learn more. And then, there's Valkyrie over in Eastern Oregon, serving the Ontario and Greater Eastern Oregon area. So there's definitely some follow-up phone calls we need to make. So if you'd like to join me in that one too, Commissioner Lilac, I'd be very pleased. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve Shipsey wants to say something.
Yeah, I would just say that the name change could occur by changing the name in statute. And then we could make a conforming change perhaps to goal 1 to the statutory change. Might be a way to do it without having to do the 10 hearings. Just a thought.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Great. Yes, Vice Chair. Deputy Director, excuse me.
Sorry, I apologize. Commissioner Warren has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Warren.
This is super exciting. I'm glad that we're kind of getting the ball rolling now. And I'm going to work on recruiting for District 2 down here. I've got some great connections. I said, or I guess one question about, the CIAC's kind of role with the goal review, because that's something that I feel like I can really sell well to potential recruits, especially in my community circle down here. So if you could give me a little more information on what that looks like, that'd be great.
Thank you, sir. So, Chair MacArthur and Commissioner Warren, invite Steve, Chair Faust into this conversation as well. So yes, we need their help. In fact, we're pushing that on the application. I think we've mentioned on the application form as well. We certainly, I had it large in my first draft. I was like, we need you. We're about to update, these significant goals for the state. So I agree with you that is a draw and a need. Back before my time, and Chair Faust will remember this, but I think painfully so, right? UGB streamlining, but Chair Faust, why don't you describe kind of where we were and where we are now on CIC involvement in actual rule writing or goal writing here, if you don't mind, please.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Director and Commissioner Warren, for the question. When I first joined CIAC many years ago, anytime there was a rulemaking effort or goal review process, the CIAC, I believe by statute, I could be wrong about that, is allotted a position on those rulemaking committees. And as you know, there's quite a few rulemaking committees, and it became a little bit onerous to try to identify one of our members to participate on each one of those rulemaking committees. So one of the things we've tried to do over the past few years to, again, all in the effort of Chair MacArthur's comment earlier about retaining people, we've made a number of changes, and one of them is staff now will bring to us before a rulemaking effort begins kind of the purpose of the rulemaking, the outreach strategy for recruiting members for the RAC, and then offering us the option of having a member serve on that rulemaking committee. And so we haven't given away that. We just at times say, you know what, we don't know that this topic has any, we approve of this, or we have comments or recommendations on this recruitment strategy for the RAC and the process, but maybe this topic doesn't warrant us identifying one of our members to participate on that committee. In the case of Goal 20, I think that we would want one of our members to definitely to participate on that committee. So I hope that answers, at least in part, answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
And I might add to what Chair Faust just said. I was involved in one of those discussions when I was a liaison to the committee, and I found the input from the CIAC on the rulemaking effort was really, really good. And I think it was a good educational moment for the rest of staff that were bringing those RAC charges and committee composition to the CIAC. So I think we're better off today, and we have improved diversity and equity on our committees, in part because of the CIAC influence. So thanks, Steve. Any other questions or comments for the committee members? If not, what I'd like to have you do, if you could put the work program back on the screen, is that possible?
Sure, Eva.
We've had a lot of great comments, input on the composition of the committee going forward, but I just want to make sure that commission members have a chance to weigh in on the work program itself, because I'll be seeking a motion to approve that with changes if you are so inclined. Thank you. Any questions about the proposed work program for 2021 for the CIAC?
Chair, mine
Yes.
was more just the sentence ensure sessions on best practices and annual conferences. It might have just been abbreviated to fit on a slide, but I wasn't able to understand that the way it was written. It just might be a shortened thing on a slide.
Yep, Chair MacArthur, I'm sorry to Bigfoot in here, but in the staff report, let's just look and see what the actual, it was shortened, and then forgive me, I've truncated it so that it's not understandable. Okay, so in attachment A is the full work plan. It's all of 2 pages. Sorry, this is the level of effort here is skinny these days, but full of, it's like haiku. It's so rich. So let's just look. That one is
the rulemaking processes. Is that
I
what
think
it?
it's
Oh
the
no, it's
conferences.
number 6
Yes,
on
thank you.
page 2 is where that is.
Yep. So CIC members wish to connect with the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association and/or other conferences as a place to showcase best practices.
Where is that?
I'm
not looking at the right thing. Or
Yeah,
something.
it's attachment A, Vice Chair, to this agenda item 8, and it's the work program. So it's a Word document, not very elegant Word document there, and it's page 2, item 6. And it says conferences, fall of 2021 and 2022.
I'll look online. I think whatever I have printed is maybe not the full thing.
Sorry, hopefully you got the mailed packet by Esther. Hopefully you're receiving the full packet. 'Cause I know I'd be handicapped if I weren't looking at a hard copy here, but I'll just read it again, or I could put it on the slide as well if that's helpful.
Well, and I think the thing that we did add though in a recommendation from Commissioner Lilac is to include more than just APA. I mean, I think that the ICMA conference, I mean, just maybe broaden, don't list the organizations, but maybe it could be CIAC members wish to connect with organizations such as the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association to do blah, blah, blah. I think that maybe just broadening that out is the only change I would recommend, but looking to fellow commissioners to respond to that. Is that an okay change for us to make?
I agree. And the reason I suggested ICMA is just because it's scheduled for Portland this fall.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
But I like that. I support the change.
Great. Okay. If you could modify that language, we'll leave it to staff and the committee to get the words right. I don't think we have to wordsmith it for
Sure.
the motion, but I think you get the gist of what we are suggesting.
Sure. Sure. We do say and or other conferences currently.
Yeah, but it's all through the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association. So anyway, just if you figure out the words, I'm not going to go there.
Got you.
Just
Got you. We'll fix that.
Yeah.
We'll fix that. Thank you. We'll take it out of the heading and fix the language. Thank you.
Super.
Yeah, with that correction. Yeah.
Yes, I totally trust what you're going to do with that. So thank you.
And not to mess with the work plan, but there's two other organizations where people circle, and I think at least. One is the ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, and the other one is ULI, the Urban Land Institute.
Great.
Great.
And if you have
an AIA, might as well put an AIA.
Sure.
There, American.
If you, yeah, if we can go in cold, but if anyone has like particular program folks' names we should connect with, that's welcome. But otherwise, we'll just knock, and I'll ask Sadie when she's back in the fall to be doing that.
So it would be in parens an EG versus an IE. So
Sure.
just
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So is there any other comments on the work program? If not, I would like to have someone offer a motion to approve the work program. Or a motion, I shouldn't dictate the outcome of it, but we have a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion. I move to approve the work plan.
Thank this CIAC 2020 web program. Great, thank you. As amended, if you don't mind me adding words to the motion, that's probably not my role officially. Hopefully Steve isn't watching, but Steve Shipsey. But the motion is in front of everybody. So Commissioner Warren moved this motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Commissioner Jacobson seconds the motion. Esther, would you call for the vote?
Vice Chair Halova.
Aye.
Commissioner Warren.
Aye.
Commissioner Pearmine.
Aye.
Commissioner Lilac.
Aye.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Aye.
Chair MacArthur.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Sandoval with an excused absence. Thank you, Esther. I think you probably heard throughout the presentation how thankful we are for the three standing members of the committee and taking the charge and going forward. I feel like you've really got this down, and we'd like to have 5 other members just like you. So, so go forth and recruit, and we will see you again, I guess, real briefly in May. Thank you very much.
Chair MacArthur, so much. And we couldn't do it without staff and Commissioner Pearmine's help. So thank you all.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heck, and thank you, Leah. Wonderful. Important stuff. Really, it's really the foundation of what we do. I mean, if we can't plan if we don't engage, and if we have to engage in the right way. And I think, even though I was saddened to see all the loss of the other members on the CIAC, I think it's a real opportunity to broaden the group. So I look at it as an opportunity more than a challenge. Thanks, everybody. So we are right on time. It's 9:44, and we get to break for 15 minutes. I'm hitting those breaks right on. I hope I get a couple of gold stars for those. So we'll reconvene at 10.
a.m.
Thank you, Esther. Appreciate that. And hello, Emma. Welcome to our meeting today. Emma Land is here for our agenda item number 10. I heard earlier that Palmer would not be able to make it. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I am not sure if he will be here because he's doing some budget stuff in the Joint Ways and Means Committee.
Thank you. Well, we feel like we're in good hands with you, so I might just have you take it away.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me get the presentation.
Oh, Palmer, hello.
Yeah, hi, good morning.
Hey, just in time.
That's what I see, yeah.
Okay, well, good morning, Chair MacArthur, Vice Chair Halova, Commission members. My name is Emma Land, the Legislative Coordinator with DLCD. I am actually joined by Palmer today, so we're here to update you on the 2021 legislative session. Palmer, do you want to say anything, introduce yourself?
No, hello, everybody, and well, let's get started.
Okay. So on our agenda today, we'll cover some big picture updates of the session, plan to spend most of our time in the presentation discussing high priority bills, and we'll then move into discussion and questions from the Commission. So as a reminder, Carol did mention this in her piece earlier this morning, but the session began on January 19th. We have an anticipated end date of June 18th, but constitutional sine die is June 27th, so we could go up to that date potentially. The primary focus of the long session is the 2021-23 biennial budget. As Carol had mentioned, DLCD presented on our recommended budget to the legislature in late February. All agencies are in the process of doing this, and it's expected to continue for the next 6 weeks or so. A lot of what gets approved is dependent upon two things: the May revenue forecast, which we are hopeful that it will be positive, as well as the state aid that's been identified in the federal stimulus package. It's our understanding that roughly $350 billion has been allocated for state and local governments, and then there's a separate amount for schools, but at this time, unsure how that's going to be divvied up across the states. So we'll see. And then there should also be a COVID-19 reevaluation in late March, early April to assess the access to the Capitol, because right now only legislators are able to access. With the update in vaccine timeline, I think a lot of information is going to happen pretty quickly, so stay tuned on that. Okay, moment you've all been waiting for, our priority bills. So I want to emphasize this list here that you see is not an exhaustive list of all the legislation we're tracking. It does represent the most high priority work that we've been involved in. And we've been tracking, we've been providing testimony, drafting amendment language. Those are the types of things that we're doing a lot of. I would also hope that Commission's able to see this is a good visual of where we're spending most of our time. You can see climate inequity, housing, and wildfires are the most prominent. And this does align well with our 2021-23 POPs, especially related to housing and climate. House Bill 2488, which you've heard mention of, it's probably the most impactful legislation for the agency. So my hope was to cover the other bills first and then spend more time talking about climate inequity and wildfire bills last. Good with y'all. Okay, let's get started with energy. House Bill 2109. This is DLCD's bill that provides a fix for the 2019 legislation, essentially so that counties won't need reimbursement for Measure 56 notices relating to renewable energy facilities. This passed through the House committee that it was assigned to. It's been read on the floor, and it's on track to head over to the Senate side. So we're one step closer to getting this passed, and we're in a good spot. I'll move to housing. So House Bill 3155, this is a bill that serves as a technical fix bill. It does two things. It directs cities within Metro to complete housing needs analysis every 6 years and adopt housing production strategies. This would be in alignment with House Bill 2003 from 2019. It would also allow for DLCD to assist cities under 10,000 to conduct this work. Palmer has really steered the amendment drafting to get this into a workable solution and a policy bill. He's been working with legislators, related stakeholders. He's done really good on this. So I can keep going, or if there's any questions, happy to go however you prefer, Chair.
Well, thanks, Emma. I just was going to ask commissioners as we go, as Emma's talking, if you have a particular point or question about one of the bills, let's do it in as she's going, because I'll forget kind of where we are for myself. But does anyone have any questions so far for Emma?
Chair MacArthur?
Yes, Commissioner Lilac and then Commissioner Permine.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Emma and Palmer if is House Bill 2006 one of the agency's priorities, or I don't see it listed here, and I know it waives land use standards inside UGBs as well as in rural residential areas for shelters and whatnot. So I was just curious if that's something you're participating in or not. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Lilac, this is Palmer Mason, Senior Policy Advisor. It is a priority bill for us. Our challenge here, Commissioner, is we could have given you 3 or 4 slides of priority bills, and the slides would have been completely full. So we tried to highlight the bills that most directly affect the department. That bill, of course, is of interest, but it doesn't affect us as directly as, say, this bill that Emma just talked about, where it's talking about our housing production strategies and the work we directly do.
Thank you. Commissioner Permine.
I was just going to say, well, first, I love this visual, and Emma, how you're simplifying things that are so hard to describe. So thank you for doing this. And that obviously we have our packet that we're following along, and that we can just raise our hand in the, if we have questions to Chair MacArthur, so that.
Yes, please, let's just make it informal. I really appreciate that point, Commissioner. Great.
So thank you. I think that specifically with the technical fix bill, I would love just, Palmer, if you can say a little bit more about how that's going, and sort of highlight the things that you're seeing along the way.
Certainly, Commissioner Permine, I'm happy to say it's going pretty well. I think what Emma was alluding to is it's been a little challenging to come up with some of the amendment language to address one issue in particular. I think the Commission's heard us say this in several previous meetings. An important priority for the department in fixing House Bill 2003 from the 2019 session was to allow smaller cities under 10,000, to be able to access the grant money that we have for housing production strategies and housing needs analysis. We always felt that smaller communities can have housing shortages too, and housing issues. So it was to allow them to be able to access the money. And there we had to have, in drafting an amendment for this bill, we went through several different conversations with Legislative Counsel and Legislative Fiscal Office on the right way to do it. Should we do that through a budget bill? Because we're really talking about funding flexibility, or do we go through a policy bill? So after multiple conversations, we ended up back at this bill, got an amendment that will basically make it optional for smaller cities to do a housing production strategy or update their housing needs analysis. And by providing that option, we felt like we could give them funding as well. And there's been pretty good support across the board from stakeholders. The key stakeholders are Metro, some of the larger cities in the Metro area like Hillsborough, Portland in particular, and then the League of Oregon Cities we've worked very closely with on this legislation. And I have to give some credit here to the Speaker's office. They committed to making these changes back in the 2020 regular session. Of course, we all know how that ended. So the bill didn't pass, and here we are again, trying to pass it now in this session. And I think it looks pretty good. The bill should actually come up hopefully for a vote next week, possibly next Thursday.
Thank you.
Great. Emma?
Okay. we'll move on to House Bill 3261. This is a bill that requires local governments to allow the conversion of a property from use as a hotel or a motel to a use as an emergency shelter or affordable housing. These projects would apply only within the urban growth boundary. Local governments can impose standards related to natural disasters or hazard mitigation. And there is an amendment for this bill that clarifies the properties that are eligible for conversion must be located in an area that provides adequate transportation access to commercial medical services, and that it's not designated in a natural disaster or hazard mitigation area unless the conversion complies with the regulations related to those disasters or hazards.
And I think we can thank you and Palmer for that amendment. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's an important one. That amendment is in the process of being drafted, and we didn't have any concerns from the bill sponsor with. So moving on
I had a question on that one.
Yes,
sure.
Vice Chair.
I just never thought if you never do a certain type of land use, you don't think much about it. Like I would have assumed that one could do that without having a bill. I would have just assumed, but I guess that's not the case. If you have a hotel, you would have to go through a condition. What would you have to go through if not this bill to get it converted to? Because there's just so many cities around the nation that are doing that, and I think we're doing that already in Portland. So I didn't even think of it as a barrier.
So Commissioner Helova, this is Palmer. I might try to answer that. I think you're certainly right. Under the Project Turnkey, and I think it was roughly $65 million last year that the legislature provided to facilitate these hotel conversions to emergency shelters and affordable housing. And you're right, a number of communities that's already happened, not just in Portland. I think there's been some in Medford and some other places where they've made these conversions. But there was a concern that not all municipal city codes would allow this, as you know, as an whether that's a simplified rezoning or what have you. So Representative Marsh works with the League of Cities, us, and some others who are involved in the Project Turnkey to provide this process as sort of as a statutory right under the set of conditions that Emma talked about.
I think it's great. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, and I might add, it's really what Palmer said, but generally in local zoning codes, hotels are considered commercial, or they might be a conditional use in one of the other zones, like in the industrial zone or a housing zone. So I think this is the intent of this is to reduce those barriers.
Yeah, in that effect, the only thing that I guess would concern me is there's a lot of hotels that are located off of highways. And I don't know if they do or don't have access to transit. So it just, hopefully the transit part doesn't limit like all of the more like cheaper motels that could be better candidates for conversion.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Thank you. Just the flip side of that is, though, we want to make sure that at least in this first wave, we focus on those areas that can be served with transit. So as I understand your point, Vice Chair, but if we, next to highways, if we convert those to housing, which is great, but it's right next to a highway, there's emissions, there's no transit maybe. I mean, I think transit is a pretty important aspect of this bill.
I agree. I'm just saying we were going to do some of this in my last company that I was with, and the ones that are available at a good price, the ones that are close to transit in great locations, they're not going to give it up as a hotel. It's just not going to be given up. So it's really the ones that are maybe not in the most prime locations that people are willing to use for that purpose. So it was more just a supply and demand. It might not
totally
exist.
Understand, and I think your perspective is important in terms of the development world and whether things are going to actually make a change on the ground or not based on prices and stuff. I think that's important. Palmer, I sort of interrupted you.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur.
Sorry, Commissioner Jacobson has had her hand up too.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not see that. So I don't have full view of everybody. So Commissioner Jacobson, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of wanted to weigh in a little bit. This is something happening in my community. We were able to get a grant through the e-board for a project for the purchase of a hotel in Lincoln City with one of our nonprofit partners. And Palmer was exactly right. What we're seeing is just inconsistency in communities that were able to get projects through Project Turnkey. What this particular city said is if people were staying in those rooms more than 30 days, it would be a conditional use permit they would need to get in order to have that, even though we've had wildfire survivors in hotels since September. And those hotels did not have to get conditional use permits for that. This particular project was told that they would need to do that. So I think this is really important because it also creates consistency between communities so that they have kind of equal opportunity to perhaps participate in that funding. I will say the amendment around transportation does raise my hackles a little bit because in a rural community, we don't have a lot of public transportation opportunities. I will say though, because we don't have a lot of mass transit, funding and opportunities, most of ours do take place along highways, right? We don't have a lot of funding to get off up into communities. So a lot of our stops are along, 101 type areas. And Commissioner Halova was absolutely correct in saying that those are a lot of the properties that were affordable and that were up for sale. Obviously not the ones that were off 101 and oceanfront, right? So that was exactly the type of property that was purchased was off 101, and we just sort of happened to have a bus stop nearby, so we would have worked through that. But having to have opportunities for mass transit in a rural community, it's just kind of like one more thing that those projects and communities have to line up, and sometimes one more thing means a project not happening. This was literally kind of this, Hercules effort to get this project going, and working with cities and working with a nonprofit and working with OCF, and trying to get cost matching for that. I mean, there was just a huge level of things that had to happen. And like I said, sometimes that one more thing, even though it's a really good idea, just becomes the barrier to these projects being done. And while I agree that transportation is important for people living there in rural communities, we don't generally have a lot of public transportation available. And then trying to get that, lining up with hotels that we can actually afford to purchase, again, kind of gets a little hairy sometimes.
If I might, Chair MacArthur, so I'm actually pulling up the language from the amendment, and I think the language is a little broader, and I think it allows some flexibility for different communities. And what it actually requires is adequate transportation access to commercial and medical services. So I'm not saying that that's the perfect magic set of words, but I think it allows each community to sort of figure out what level and what type of transportation they need to make these hotel conversions happen.
Thank you, Palmer. And I just want to really thank you, Commissioner Jacobson. Excellent points. It's a lens I wasn't looking through, so you've really broadened my perspective. I appreciate your points.
I wanted to throw out one more thing. Sorry, Commissioner. It was just about the, some of the organizations that do shelters have internal transportation services that they can provide too. So it feels like it should be flexible enough to allow people to do what they do. Most of those organizations don't want to put people where they can't have access to these things. So yeah.
Commissioner Jacobson, did you have a follow-up?
I did. You're absolutely correct, Commissioner Halova. And also, being on a highway, there is oftentimes foot access to some of those services because most of our communities on the coast are built around 101. I guess the last thing I would just say that I think is an important point is while these projects are great, we're super grateful for qualifying for one. People have been living in hotels, at least in my community, for a long time. This is not a new thing. I think these, projects with funding for nonprofits to purchase these hotels and kind of call it what it is, it's kind of bringing this issue to light. But lots of people use hotels to be housed and stay in there more than 30 days. So this is something that's been happening for a super long time. Even in places where over 30-day use is not allowed, people are living in hotels because it's some of the only affordable housing that people can find and afford. So I just wanted to bring that issue to light, that people living in hotels for shelter is not a new concept in communities that are housing challenged. It's certainly been happening here a long time. And I think this just kind of brings that to light, and hopefully with some of these kind of legislative fixes and more funding that can grow, and more services can be run, et cetera. But it is something that's already been happening way before Project Turnkey started.
Commissioner, I wanted to add to that. It made me think about hotels are basically infusing into residential spaces with Airbnbs, and the idea that we can't let residential infuse into hotels is kind of funny.
Yeah, I never thought of it quite like that, Commissioner. Yes, but you're right. There is sort of this flip-flop happening. I'd already sort of just seen the one side with vacation rentals, but yeah, thank you for that perspective. You're right.
Great. So Emma or Palmer, why don't you continue on? All really good points around this bill.
Okay, we'll move to House Bill 3219. So this is a bill that's related to manufactured dwelling parks that have been affected by the 2020 wildfires. DLCD, we've been involved in working with the bill sponsor to have some language around this bill that provides for the protection against natural hazards and ensuring communities can meet federal national floodplain insurance programs regulations. So, where FEMA says in order to qualify for a subsidized program, you have to comply with floodplain standards around where you site and how you build flood safe. So, this bill would essentially kind of help these parks be redeveloped, the ones that are damaged from the wildfires. Any questions?
I don't see any. I think you can just continue until somebody maybe just throws in and interrupts or something. It might flow a little better than stopping you each time. Thanks.
Sounds good. Okay, so we'll move to the urban lands, House Bill 2558. This is a bill that requires local governments to allow certain levels of residential development near fixed guideway transit stops. It also limits some parking minimums. So this would be for light rail and commuter rail in the Portland metro area and for bus rapid transit in Portland metro, Eugene, and Springfield. The affected areas are 1/8 of a mile from these fixed guideway transit stops. It is within an urban growth boundary, and it would be for zones for residential or mixed uses. And they must allow for certain numbers of residential multifamily buildings as well. So since this relates to some of the work that DLCD is doing through our climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking, the bill proponents, they've agreed to have a statement read on the floor by one of the bill sponsors, essentially clarifying that this bill doesn't impede any of the work done by DLCD that might be larger in impact.
Great, that's wonderful. Good catch on that.
Yeah. So House Bill 2282, I can, I'll do an attempt to give you some high level understanding of this, but I will admit Palmer's been way more involved and he knows the complex details a little better, so he may jump in. So this legislation, it would require the city of Bend, if they chose to expand their urban growth boundary in the southern part of the city, it would require, and this land is currently owned by DSL. Ben would have to develop a conceptual plan that would be reviewed by Director of DLCD.
Emma, forgive me, Chair MacArthur, if I could just clarify that DSL is the Division of State Lands.
Sorry. Yes, thank you.
It's actually the Department of State Lands.
Yeah, Department of State Lands.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Ben would adopt an ordinance that's the basis of the comprehensive plan amendments, and those would come to the director for review, and they have certain standards in the bill. The standards are in lieu of our statewide planning goals, but they should mirror what we normally review under those goals. Ben would have to build to a higher residential standard, and that includes things like middle housing. And they would also have to have dedicated land to affordable housing. And with that, I may let Palmer add anything that I may have missed, or if not, we'll move on.
No, Chair MacArthur, I think Emma did a good job. This bill is a complicated situation. It has the elements that Emma talked about, the UGB expansion to bring in an area known as the Stevens Tract, about 260 acres on the south side of Bend. The state, through the Department of State Lands, owned another portion that's already now within the UGB and is being developed. So this would be the remaining portion. If all this were to happen, where the UGB was expanded and then developed the comprehensive plan amendments, DSL, Department of State Lands, would then be able to sell the property to a developer, and there would be money that would go into the Common School Fund. But as Emma indicated in the negotiations around this bill, which really started in the 2020 regular session, there was a bill then, and again, you know, like so many bills, they're back now because of what happened in 2020. We are working on this bill again. Ben would be building, you know, a community that would be at a higher standard in terms of densities and affordable housing and you know, sort of transit-oriented development and things like that. So it was kind of a unique opportunity, because typically the department would prefer the legislature not to mandate a UGB expansion, but this was a unique opportunity to bring in a certain amount of acreage to probably our fastest growing city, and add it in quote unquote the right place in terms of where it is on the city's location, and then benefit the Common School Fund, and at that get a development that, you know, sort of met higher standards. So you know, I think we feel like at the department that at the end of the day, the director will basically be able to apply the type of review that we would normally go through in a comp plan amendment, even though the bill has a sort of a streamlined and alternate process.
Thank you, Palmer. I think it is a unique opportunity, and there's really good intent there. I expressed, along with Commissioner Sandoval, I'm on the Legislative Liaison Group subcommittee, and I expressed my concern about land swaps and zone changes and UGB amendments by legislation, and I think it's a really slippery slope. It disturbs me. I think the idea and the intent and the opportunity are great, but it really disturbs me because I have seen this slippery slope go the wrong way. And so I have asked in particular, since this probably has legs, that to make sure that in the legislative history as well as the bill itself, that it is very prescriptive to this particular situation, so that it can't just be picked up by another community to do that. I just think it's a really sort of bad precedent in general. And I think that Katie Permine had her hand up as well.
Well, I'm just going to echo that, and I'm curious why it didn't work through the existing process. So I don't know if we have insight into that, or if this is another conversation for another time. And I'm also curious about Commissioner Lelak's perspective, if he's interested in sharing, and no pressure there either, Commissioner Lelak. But I agree that this is, I don't appreciate, I think it's pretty dangerous to have the work around the program like this when the intent of the program is to do this very thing.
I mean, I'll defer to Commissioner Lilac if he wants to start. I'm happy to respond though. So I defer to you, Commissioner, whether you want to start first.
Thank you, both Commissioner Pearmine and Palmer. From Central Oregon has proposed such amendments in the past. So when I see these, I say this delicately, I'm not always surprised. For example, when this one was raised as a legislative concept, my advice to our Board of County Commissioners is, number one, look to your counterparts with the City of Bend and see what is their perspective, because this is really going to impact their urban growth boundary. Yes, it's currently county lands right now. Deschutes County several years ago approved the zone change from EFU to multiple use agricultural 10, which is an exception zone, because it's never been farmed. It's always been dry. I mean, all those reasons. It did not qualify as farmland, so that was all fine. This is a really unique circumstance with DSL, with the Metolius transfer development opportunities, with all of these different components. So I'll just leave it at that. I think I really defer. This is a political compromise on so many different levels. I can just share that a similar situation came up in yet another regional meeting a couple of days ago about something near Redmond, and I took the position in with our county commissioners and everybody else there and said, I don't believe a legislative proposal is the right path. I think we need to follow the path that's in place, and it's public input should be at the local level, not just before the state legislative committees for these really significant decisions. So I'll just thanks for the opportunity, but that's all I will say at this point. Thank you.
If I might, Chair MacArthur, add, I think Commissioner Pearmine, we saw that this issue back in 2020 really did have momentum, and there was a pretty good chance that it was going to pass. If it had just strictly been a conversation around the Metolius Basin and what do you do with the transfer of development opportunity, it probably wouldn't have had legs. But when it got hitched to Bend and their UGB expansion and the opportunity to realize a return for the Common School Fund, it took on a whole new life, whole new political life. So we just had to make, I believe correctly, the strategic decision to say, well, how do we help make this bill, while it is, it departs from the normal process, how do we make it so that it honors the spirit of our program and mirrors the current process as much as possible? And I think we've done that. I think we've threaded that needle. While the UGB itself and the comp plan amendments that outline the development don't go to the commission, they do go to the director. And the director will be able to apply standards that are intended to replicate or mirror the standards that we have under our statewide planning goals. So I think at the end of the day, like I said before, we're going to be basically looking at the same issues and applying pretty much the same standards that we would otherwise. It's just going through an alternative process. And to Commissioner MacArthur's point, Chair MacArthur's point, I think the bill sponsor has been very clear that this is a unique situation. He doesn't see this particular language in a process applying anywhere else. And we're trying to build into the record that this is such a unique exception that it might justify a different process, but it should definitely not be the normal approach.
Thank you, Palmer. I have a final question. It's really kind of I'm curious, how much discussion was there between the Jim Rue and the director of the Division of State Lands, Department of State Lands? I guess it was a year ago now, before this was introduced. I know that DSL didn't initiate it, I don't believe, but this is a fellow state agency that should have similar goals. We should all be collective in our desire to do certain things as a state. And I'm just wondering about that. Perhaps you can't answer that. I might ask Jim that separately, but I worry about agencies like when we had the energy department coming out relative to an issue on land use. For us, it was helpful, but I kind of wonder how much conversation and understanding there is jointly across the agencies about common principles of land use and energy and other kinds of things.
So, Chair MacArthur, I can't speak for Jim in his conversations, and since I got to the meeting later, I'm not even sure if he's on to the call now or not. Okay, I see people shaking their heads, so I guess he's at another meeting. I can only speak for myself and my conversations with the folks that I worked with at the Department of State Lands, and so that was the project manager who is overseeing the Stevens Track development. I mean, DSL was already working on a proposal to try to market this land, even though it was outside the UGB. So I've spoken extensively with that gentleman, and then, you know, various members of the government relations team at DSL. And I think, at least again, from my perspective, we've always worked well and had a common goal that the two agencies would be united. Yes, we have different responsibilities. They actually have responsibility of being maybe not so much a developer, but preparing land for ultimate development. And we have a role of making sure that we're being protective of our resource values and infrastructure and other things that we care about in the land use planning program. But I think we worked those issues out well. And I really do think the language in the bill, while I'm sure it's not perfect, does a lot to provide the checks and balances that we want to see in the process, although albeit in a streamlined way.
Thank you, Palmer. I don't know if any other commissioners have their hands up on this.
Commissioner Warren.
Commissioner Warren, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair MacArthur, and thank you, Palmer and Emma, for updating us on all this fun stuff. So my concern, and forgive me for my ignorance, but are comp plans binding? So if they do say in this comprehensive plan that, hey, we have to build X amount of affordable housing, is there any way to hold them to that?
I mean, yes, the answer is they are legally binding. You probably would need to refer to Mr. Shipshy on our exact enforcement powers and stuff. I mean, that may be the avenue that we would have to take. But I have to say, we are talking about the city of Bend, and I think the city of Bend does have a good track record on developing, you know, quote unquote, in the right way. No city's perfect, but I think they generally do a good job. But maybe Steve could speak more to our enforcement powers if for whatever reason the city didn't follow through.
Yeah, I'll accept that invitation real quick and happy to follow up with more information if you'd like, Commissioner. But in general, comprehensive plans are controlling, and the city would have to approve any land use applications in compliance with that, or you know, take action to change the comp plan. As far as our enforcement powers, it would be a land use decision to approve a project, and like anybody else, our enforcement would be through a challenge to the Land Use Board of Appeals of that decision. In the event that it was an amendment to the comprehensive plan, that would need to be submitted to the department, and then we would have an opportunity to review and comment. But again, that to challenge that would be probably through an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals.
So thank you, Steve. A follow-up question on that, because I thought I heard Commissioner Lilac say that area had already been rezoned from EFU, but maybe that's a zoning designation that's outside the urban growth boundary. So let's say this comes into the urban growth boundary, it would go from whatever that other designation is to a comprehensive plan designation with these provisions in it. And that would be up to the city of Bend to figure out how to incorporate the bill language, at that point, the law language, into its comprehensive plan or deeds or whatever. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how it flows down to the local level to actually get to Commissioner Warren's point of providing affordable housing.
I think I can answer that, Chair MacArthur. So the way the bill is drafted is after the conceptual plan is approved, and that's just a general idea of how this 260 acres would be developed consistent with the requirements in the bill. The city of Bend would have to adopt an ordinance, and there's quite a bit of language in the bill about the public process that they would have to go through. And there's even some I think maybe some evolving new practices about how you reach out through social media and some other tools to, try to get to as many members of the public as you can. The city would adopt this ordinance. That ordinance would basically embody the comprehensive plan amendments, and that is under the bill. Those comprehensive plan amendments have to meet standards around transportation, infrastructure, natural hazards, parks and open space, middle housing. In fact, the language there is specific that Ben would have to build at a higher gross unit per unit gross acre density standard than other developments in the city. And those comp plan amendments would come to the director for review. So again, as I said, I feel like there's a lot of checks and balances built into the process, even though admittedly it's not the same process we have now, and there is limited appeal rights for members of the public, that type of thing, and it doesn't go to the commission. It's at the department level, at least, we are looking at, or would be looking at, this set of comprehensive plan amendments in pretty much the way that we would look at any other.
Thank you. And I know that the bill says that the director would look at it, review it, and do his part or her part in the future. But I guess I would request not change the bill language, obviously, but I think this commission would be interested in a briefing from the director at the appropriate time, so we get an understanding of how this is going to play out on the ground.
Oh, okay, well, we can certainly do that. Chair MacArthur, I'm just mindful of the time. We probably should definitely move on, because I think we're going to want to talk a lot about climate inequity and wildfires.
Right. So why don't we do a quick review of the bottom section of the chart and then go back to climate inequity.
Yep, I can cover those pretty quickly. So Senate Bill 391 is a bill that stems from a concept that's been proposed over several legislative sessions. It would allow counties to authorize the construction of accessory dwelling units on lands that are zoned for rural residential use. We have worked with the bill sponsor to develop amendment language that would add protection for our working farm and forest lands from the impacts of urban development. And we've also developed additional protections related to wildfire risks. Definitely want to call out Commissioner Lilac, who helped with this process, had a conversation, and also Holly Kearns from Baker County. She provided some really great input too. So it's been a collaborative discussion on this piece.
Chair?
Yes.
So this is kind of random, but I was presenting at a conference and somebody asked a question in the audience about, was this bill counter to the climate initiatives? And not that you need to answer it necessarily, but how do those interact, I guess? The climate friendly work and the location, is it different locations? Like we're not even.
If I might, Chair MacArthur, Commissioner Holova, they are different locations. What Emma is talking about in this bill is rural residential. So these are areas outside the UGB. Most of these are, I guess, in layperson's term, we call them like sort of not quite incorporated cities, but communities that were outside of UGBs, many of which existed, before we set up the program. And under current state law, we do allow some limited urban-like development, more residential type development. And so this would be adding accessory dwelling units to parcels, but under a fairly strict set of conditions about where to do that. One can certainly argue that there's climate aspects because we are allowing people to potentially move out to areas, outside of the urban core and that kind of thing. But I think what motivated the bill sponsors is they were interested in trying to provide an opportunity for a family or a property owner to add an ADU around an existing structure to partially alleviate housing crisis, because even rural communities have housing shortages and things like that. And the bill sponsor is really trying to make sure that these don't turn into just short-term vacation rentals, but they are more part of the permanent housing stock. And to Emma's earlier point, our work around the amendment was really to try to make sure that we are conscious of putting potentially more people in the way of wildfires. And so how do we make sure that society rural ADUs is a safe. Hopefully that answered your questions or helped a bit.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll jump to Senate Bill 16 quickly. So this is a bill that would allow up to 200 acres of lands that are currently planned and zoned for exclusive farm use located in the Eastern Oregon Border Economic Development Region to be rezoned to residential use without taking exception to either Goal 3 or Goal 14, and those are agricultural lands and urbanization, respectively. Counties would no longer be required to amend their comprehensive plans when converting this exclusive farm use land or go through the public process to receive approval to do so. This bill did pass out of committee. At this time, I haven't seen that it's been scheduled to go to the floor for a vote yet, but we're keeping an eye on it.
To your knowledge, is there a housing shortage in any of those communities? No.
It's tricky.
So,
you don't need to
ahead,
answer
Emma.
that. Actually, I just sort of, yeah, you don't need to answer that. And there is a lot of, rangeland out there. But this is, I think it's good for all the commissioners to see what happens in the legislative session. It seems like, and just a reminder to folks that Emma and Palmer are doing a super job. So our comments are not targeted at you, because basically they're looking at bills that already are in the hopper and they're trying to modify them in a way that could work for us, if work for the land use program, if they were adopted. So I appreciate what a difficult job you have, but this is just a reflection of what happens every single session. So that's just my soapbox thing. You can continue on to wildfires if you want.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur. I'll touch briefly on this coastal bill, House Bill 2603. It's a bill that relates to the placement of undersea cables. As it's currently written, it would direct DLCD in coordination with the Department of State Lands to conduct a study and propose some changes to the permitting and siting processes of cables. There is a new potential approach in an amendment being developed that would direct DLCD to do this study under the Territorial Sea Plan Part 4 update process under the Oregon Coastal Management Program. It's very, early in the stages. We're process of working it out. So I'll be able to provide more details later on that. So let's jump into the big ones, wildfires. So Palmer, do you want to talk about this? I know I've been talking a lot. I mean, I'm happy to keep going, but.
No, that's fine, Emma. I can do it. You've done a great job, but I can help here. So as Emma said, wildfire is one of the priority issues. That's not news to the commission. Let's talk about these bills. There's really two different types of bills, and I'll give you the bill numbers and kind of clear it up for you. But broadly, just so you have an idea of what we're talking about, there are bills that I call the wildfire prevention bills. These are bills that are aimed at trying to suppress, mitigate, or prevent fires or their impacts in communities and in our forest. And then there's a totally different set of bills, and I am basically calling them the wildfire rebuild bills. So these are helping fire impacted communities rebuild and recover from the damage they took in 2020. I'm going to talk first here about that first category. So these are the prevention bills. So Senate Bill 287 and Senate Bill 248 are likely to be the bills that move, although there are several House bills that are related. And Senate Bill 287 is the governor's office bill, and then Senate Bill 248 is Senator Golden's bill. He's from the Southern Oregon area and chairs Senate Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery. These bills are pretty similar. They build on a number of recommendations from the governor's Wildfire Response Council that finished its work in 2019. And they look at how we manage our forests to mitigate the risk of wildfires, what kind of modernization needs to happen at the Department of Forestry, requiring utilities to develop plans to prevent sparking and fires that might result from their infrastructure. It talks about issues of defensible space, and just a whole host of issues. But the kind of the key parts of this bill that relate most to the statewide land use program and to local planning are really around wildfire risk mapping. I think most of you probably know that the Department of Forestry and other entities do some level of wildfire risk mapping in the state of Oregon, particularly around the wildfire urban interface, the WUI as it's called. But those maps have never really been thought about or constructed in a way that they would serve as like a regulatory basis or have a regulatory effect in local comprehensive plans or zoning codes. And so the big conversation is around updating those maps and then thinking about turning those maps into a tool that could be, again, at the foundation of local comprehensive planning and zoning codes. So when communities are planning for development and growth, they're taking into account the wildfire risk. The two bills take a little bit different approach. One bill looks to have a very long stakeholder process that would lead to a set of legislative recommendations. The other bill, Senate Bill 248, takes a little bit more of a streamlined process and has the department providing a study to the legislature basically for the 23 session, so the 2023 session, around how you integrate these wildfire risk maps into local comp plans and zoning codes. So that maybe I should stop there and see if there are any questions around those two bills or those broader issues of how you basically modernize and update the land use program for wildfire risk.
Commissioners? Don't see any hands.
Chair MacArthur, I'll just ask one quick question. Thanks, Palmer. You had mentioned the House bills. I assume you're probably referring to House bills 2722 and 2794 that establish those committees. Do you see that process moving forward with those committees and processes, or is it more likely it'll be, for lack of a better term, more action oriented, like Senate Bill 248?
It's a great question, Commissioner, and that is really, I don't know that it's completely resolved. And so just for a little context for the rest of the commission, what Commissioner Lilac is referring to is the two House bills in particular, and then the governor's bill, Senate Bill 287, lays out a land use advisory committee that would be made up of a very broad and large list of stakeholders that would help DLCD and the Department of Forestry come up with these recommendations about how to use the wildfire risk maps and how you would update the land use programs. Senator Golden has been insisting that we need to move faster than the speed of government. And he's been pushing for a more accelerated process. So that's really an open question right now, Commissioner Lilac. Which way is the legislature going to lean in terms of the level of process and the speed in which recommendations would? I still think recommendations will come back to the legislature before there would ever be any action by DLCD or other entities, local governments in particular. But it's an open question on that, and I don't even know that the governor's office, where they have totally landed on whether we move faster or we sort of keep the process that was talked about in the 2020 session.
Thank you. Any other comments on wildfires? let's move to another
Your
big
Chair,
topic. Oh,
Commissioner Pearmine has her hand raised.
Thank you. I just can't see.
I mean, I think it's worth saying that the speed of government, and we all lived through a traumatic event, some of us more closely to it than others, and how communities are perceiving wildfire, it does need to take some time, because it's a complicated, really difficult thing for communities to navigate. And so this isn't we're not going to solve it by policy. We have to do this as communities. So, I mean, yes, policy will help us do this, but I don't know. I just wanted to make that observation related to why stakeholder community engagement is so crucial for this, because we all have to understand the risks of development when we're developing in these areas and get on the same page about what that means.
Well said. Well said.
ahead.
Thank you. No, I'm just wanting to say well said. Thanks, Palmer.
Yeah, I think regardless of whatever bill moves, that there will be multiple opportunities for community engagement and public conversation around what this looks like. And I probably should have been more clear. Mostly what these bills are talking about is at the state level, what would DLCD and the commission in particular lay out as the requirements for local governments? And then obviously there will be a robust conversation about that, because this is land use after all, and they're always robust conversations. But then it will move to the community level, and there will be another level of robust conversations. So I think there will always be process. And another point I should have made early on about wildfires is the legislature is looking at the wildfire impacted communities in multiple ways, not just policy, funding, assistance, and other that. We'll talk a bit about that here in a second, but there really is a lot of focus on the fire impacted communities right now. So if I might, I'll move on to Senate Bill 405. And actually, Senate Bill 405 and the next bullet around the House Legislative Work Group are pretty related ideas. This is the work the legislature is doing around what I call the wildfire rebuild legislation. So how do we help make sure the land use requirements, particularly for resource lands, so our farm and forest lands, allow or don't get in the way of allowing people to essentially build what they had? And really the focus here is on allowing people to be made whole and return to what they had. So if they are doing a replacement dwelling because they lost a house in a fire, how do we streamline that process so they can get back to having that house as quickly as possible? And there's a lot of concern, not just with helping people who were damaged in the wildfires, but quite frankly, the fate of these communities. I think legislators from these areas are worried about people leaving because they've lost homes, the commercial industries and structures have been lost, so where are the jobs? And they're just all interested in trying to help these communities rebuild as fast as possible. The other thing is there are, issues like non-conforming uses. So I got, a conditional use to put, a farm stand around my farm, and I was selling, whatever, pumpkin, squash, whatever I might have been selling. So there are issues not just around dwellings, but non-residential structures, and how do you help people build those back? This is surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, kind of pretty complicated to balance the resource concerns that we have around protecting farm and forest lands with helping people navigate the process in as easy as way as possible, understanding people have lost important records, that they might have had about their building and stuff. So we've spent a lot of time on this legislation. I do want to call out John Jennings in particular. He has helped Emma and I a great deal. Hillary Foote has given quite a bit of time as well to help us develop legislation. And like Commissioner or Charlie MacArthur said, I think we're navigating the line here pretty good of being respectful of what we want to protect in the land use program while streamlining the process to help people get back as quickly as they can. So I'll stop and see if there's any questions about, those two, that bill, Senate Bill 405 and the work group. All right, so what last thing I'll mention then around wildfires is funding. And that's why I was late to the meeting today. You all may have heard that from Emma or Jim or Kirsten earlier. Representative Clem was an advocate for the department, our department getting some money in this biennium. So what I'm going to be talking about is money in this biennium to place professional planners in the fire impacted communities and help those communities with a wide variety of issues. It might be helping someone get their building permit to rebuild their destroyed house at the planning counter, but it could also be helping the community think about long-term planning around rebuilding for the future and how you provide infrastructure, how you make your community more fire adaptive. It's just helping them because they're critically overloaded and chronically understaffed with all those housing or all those planning issues that are being discussed and need action at the local level. So again, we would use roughly $100,000 to hire experienced planners, vendors, contractors, and bring them to the fire impacted regions and help them. I was in the full Ways and Means. They adopted the amendment today, this morning, that included $100,000 for that assistance. It will now move to the floors for a vote. And we may actually see action on that bill, which is known as a budget reconciliation bill, fairly quickly. And there is a conversation that's happening about taking this same idea of the department contracting out to hire vendors to help these fire impacted communities into the next biennium, but that will happen later in May and June when that budget bill is being discussed.
This is really good news on a couple of fronts in terms of Representative Clem and others recognizing the importance of providing resource to communities, but it's an opportunity for us to show that we actually can value add in those places where that have been hard hit. So I'm excited about this.
Chair, Commissioner Jacobson has her hand raised.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Yeah, just a big thank you for that, Bill. Actually, that was what I did not know was happening. So that's a pleasant surprise, and we're very grateful. In Lincoln County, we are completely overwhelmed in planning right now, and not just because of wildfires, but because we are seeing like a record number of projects happening in our county. So we have a large community that needs to rebuild, 300 homes destroyed, on top of just the huge boom in building permits in general. And beyond just the building permits, all of the community that was burned was all on septic systems. So we have those approvals that need to take place. So we are really grateful, to hopefully get some help doing this, because this is, not going to be a race. It's going to be a marathon, and we could really use some help. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Great. I know we're a little over time, but we do want to let Palmer and Emma talk about the climate and equity package.
Yeah, let's, if it makes sense, we can kind of go from the bottom up on these bullets and cover those bottom two pretty quickly, and then spend some time on House Bill 2488. So Senate Bill 286 is the governor's bill. This is a bill that would change the Environmental Justice Task Force to council, and it directs the Oregon Health Authority and the Department of Environmental Quality to develop an equity mapping approach and process for evaluating equity concerns in natural resource agencies. We have been working now with the Department of Environmental Quality on how this could potentially tie into House Bill 2488, because there is an equity mapping tool piece of that, which we can mention in a bit. For the GRB Package 90, so this is governor's recommended budget for the 2021-23 biennium. There's a Package 90 that includes two items. The first is $1 million for DLCD to identify equity-driven strategies to help increase resiliency in rural transportation systems. The department has a proposal for these funds to essentially provide direct technical and financial assistance to rural communities that have a disadvantage to transportation. And the assistance would really help prepare and equip these communities to have a competitive place when looking for funding opportunities. So we're hopeful that we can get that moving forward. The other piece is the $800,000 that has been focused for environmental justice and land use. So the governor has directed DLCD to focus these funds on an effort to create a new planning goal that addresses climate equity and environmental justice. And that is where House Bill 2488 ties in, because this is a bill that's been proposed by the environmental community. And so Palmer and I have been working pretty closely with these proponents in an effort to create a framework for how we could potentially spend the funding in the governor's recommended budget. It's definitely been a very collaborative process. We've been drafting this legislation together, going back and forth and trying to make sure that we're hitting points that's actually doable for the agency. The bill itself directs Commission, LCDC, to adopt a new single statewide planning goal 20 to address climate, equity, and environmental justice by June 30th, 2023. In this bill, a local government's obligation to the climate change piece is limited at the comprehensive plan level. The equity and environmental justice piece is more specific, and it's addressed through a set of requirements essentially to ensure that public participation in land use decisions is available to all Oregonians. It does direct local governments to use a mapping tool, and this would either be a DLCD developed tool or a methodology that's comparable that would identify and address disparate impacts from land use decisions. And there is, of course, we've tried to create a compliance schedule for cities and counties to implement this process. And so it starts with the larger populations and trickles down to the smaller populations, also providing an opt-in for the smallest cities and counties. And there's what's very important is there's a climate justice planning goal fund that would be created, and that would of course be used to assist in creating and implementing the new goal. And these funds would be prioritized for less well-resourced local governments and must be distributed throughout regions of the state. That is my attempt to explain this very long, complicated bill in a higher level way. So let me know if I can answer questions, and of course Palmer too.
You did a great job, Emma. Questions from commissioners?
Commissioner Lilac has his hand raised.
Thank you, Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you, Chair MacArthur, and thank you both. That's so much information about House Bill 2488 and where it's come from and where it may be going, and connecting all these dots is super helpful. I guess maybe two questions. One is, I guess there's a big -1 coming, and we haven't seen that yet. So I assume you're intimately involved in that process, number one. But probably my bigger question for our purposes as a commission is, do you see this as being, of course, we have a lot of work to do to create this goal. Will we then also be in a position to write administrative rules to implement the goal? And if so, would that happen simultaneously? Or if we complete our work by the June 30th, 2023, we then spend time after that developing administrative rules to implement the goal? I'm just curious about that process.
Paul, well, I guess I'll just jump in. I don't think the amount of money, I've raised this before, the amount of money probably would be allocated to this is probably insufficient to get all the way to both a goal adoption as well as administrative rules. Maybe I'm dated on that information, but Palmer or Emma, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think you accurately identified it. This is a huge endeavor. I think we could definitely do all of that if we had a larger amount of funding. But yeah, so the hope is that we could do that process in a future biennium with future.
And I know the staff is sort of constrained, if you will, in terms of advocating for additional dollars for various things. And I understand that, but it is a public forum. So I use it as a forum to encourage the interest groups that are involved in this process to advocate for more dollars as well, because this is a really important, critically important topic. It'd be super wonderful to have a Goal 20. But like everything we do, we want to get this right. So I'd advocate for people to weigh in on the funding piece of that.
And Chair MacArthur, if I can just ask one more kind of follow-up question, is I did see it at least in the bill that we have now before the -1s, is it talks about targets that local governments should meet, which can be a great thing. What would concern me is if those targets are in the goal, and so if those targets ever need to be changed, it takes a goal revision and amendment as opposed to rule, which is much more. So that's really where I was going.
Yes.
If I might, Chair MacArthur, respond to that point. So Commissioner Lilac, the way the draft 1 amendment would try to address that is it would direct local governments to update the objectives and policies in their comprehensive plans that relate to what I call the big elements that actually drive growth and development. So think transportation, housing, public facilities and services, natural hazards, natural resources, the things that, as you think about developing your community over the next 20 years, these are the issues you want to look at, so that you have the appropriate infrastructure and you plan the community in a thoughtful way. And the goal is, by updating all those pieces, you've got a comp plan that I call climate ready, and that's climate in both a mitigation sense as well as an adaptation sense. The amendment will say, though, that the goal language, the new Goal 20, if all of this happens, that local governments are updating those parts of their comprehensive plan that I just talked about in a way that's consistent with the current statutory greenhouse gas reduction goals. So those are goals, obviously, I think they go out to 2050, and they have their own targets that require a reduction in greenhouse gases from a 1990 baseline level. That's going to be a little bit of complicated work for the department and the commission to address, in how we measure whether or understand whether comp plan amendments are actually on track to meet those goals. But there will not be, the language doesn't say that there's a specific target per se. It had, fortunately, the language in the goal is written a little more generally about how, meeting those statutory goals. I do think over time, as the resources become available, and the chair's point was a good one, there's not enough money in the $800,000 to really do any rulemaking. We will have to probably refine the goal through future rules and address questions like that one.
Any follow-up? Then Commissioner, thank you, Nick. Commissioner Pearmine.
Sorry, yeah, it wasn't a follow-up. It's cutting in. Great question, Commissioner Lilac, and thanks for that response. Well, this is a moment for the program to, if this passes, for this sort of awareness of the importance of the program, right? For obviously climate change, but then equity and justice as well, which I think it's timely, both because of the age of the program as well, that we have this moment to be really deeply reflective about how this program is serving the people in the state and holistically, but also our planet. So I think it's very exciting to think about. And so I really appreciate the flagging of the need to have adequate funding for rules. And I'm also, just Palmer, since you're so close to this work, I'm just wondering if you want to flag anything else for us to be paying attention to be thinking about as a commission, so that we can be supportive partners with you along the way.
I thank you for the question, Commissioner. I think one thing that we're all going to hear, the department and the commission, and I think correctly so, from local governments, is where is the money to support local implementation of this goal? And right now, there are no identified dollars to provide for that need. To Emma's earlier point, the way the draft or the way the -1 amendment is written is that local governments, based on their size, have to implement over time. So the thinking goes that we've stretched the implementation schedule out over a couple biennium, meaning we can try to find those resources to support local governments over time. But the local governments, particularly LOC and AOC, have already made it pretty clear that they have concern about the bill because of the absence of the local assistance for implementation. I don't think that in particular they're opposed to the equity pieces. Some of their members may have more questions about the climate piece, but again, they are feeling the weight of lots of initiatives from the legislature and the pressures of the pandemic and wildfires in some places, and just where is the money to support that. So that's going to be one of the large talking points about where this goes forward. And if the commissioners in their personal capacity have some thoughts on that, then let your local senator and representative know.
Thank you, Palmer and Emma. I don't see any other commissioners with their hands up, and I'm not getting my secret little texts from Casaria. So I think we thank you again. You guys just do there's a lot of bills out there, and as you say, Palmer and Emma, that there's a lot of other bills beyond this list that you see, and you think about how much time each and every one of these takes. It's a pretty big workload, and we really appreciate. We feel very comfortable and grateful that you're in charge of our legislative agenda. So thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Well, that completes our conversation on that agenda item. We don't have any appeals. We only have the final kind of other business, and I was going to raise a point under that real quickly. Commissioner Jacobson, every time you speak, I just so appreciate the experience you bring to this commission and the glimpse I get of the coast. And it's on so many different issues. It's really, I always learn something. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering, if for the next virtual tour we take as a commission, time permitting, we didn't do a virtual tour this time, but virtual tour like we had last month, maybe we could highlight the coast. I know the coast is a large area, but maybe highlight the coast. And I'm not asking you to do extra work for it, but be a partner in giving staff advice on how to tailor that to reflect. We have the Rocky Shores issue coming up. I don't want to have it totally focused on that. I just want to have a better understanding myself, and hopefully my fellow commissioners, about what kinds of opportunities and challenges you're facing in communities along the coast. So if that is an acceptable thing, I might just sort of throw that into the hopper for an upcoming meeting to be planned.
Yeah, I think that would be great, and I'd be happy to work with staff on that. I'm hoping at some point here when we can meet in person, it'd be nice to actually have a meeting out here on the coast at some point in time, but for now we can plan a virtual tour. I think the other thing I would just add around tours, and I know some of us living in certain communities have already seen this, but I think it would probably be important for the commission at some point, and I would say in person, not online, to actually do a tour of a wildfire impacted community. It's really helpful to see those issues firsthand and understand not just the devastation, but the on the ground challenges to rebuilding and getting those communities back together. It's one thing to see it in a photo. It's another thing to understand that, the road needs to be repaired to get the house on, and the septic system is burned to get the house on, and all these challenges that just stack up against each other for people. So I would really say at some point in time when that's, safe for everybody, I would really encourage wildfire look too. And even though I don't really like, devastation tourism, I think it's important for us as a commission that looks at land use to understand the challenges that those people are facing in terms of getting home and also, and doing some forward planning on wildfire. So I think it would be important for us to do that. But I'm happy to help staff and do a coastal tour as well.
Thank you. Excellent point.
Chair.
Appreciate that. Yes.
I wanted to second that concept. I learned a lot the last time we went to the coast. It's just being there and seeing distances to tsunami zone area, the spatial relationships speak a lot about, and the kind of limits to where development can occur. You can't really get that fully by not visiting. The other thing I was going to say is, as we think about post-COVID life or intermediate COVID life, how about that? If we do decide to have meetings in person, I would prefer that we have them at these, outreach ones than to just have them in Salem to have them. Partly because I know it's going to be hard for folks that have kids if they don't go back to a regular schedule. So it's going to be a big challenge, let's just say, to make a meeting, and I'd rather make the big challenge for site ones that involve being somewhere else besides Salem, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does. Commissioner Jacobson, did you have your hand up again or not?
I did not. Sorry about that.
So Commissioner Lilac.
Thank you. I would just say I'm more than happy to help set up any of those tours with my county planning director colleagues for those wildfire devastation tours and the rebuild, and they can help pull. And I offer that because DLCD staff is going to be critical as well, but I also recognize the demands placed on all of you. So just happy to help however I can with that.
Thank you. Deputy Director Green.
Thank you. It's exciting thanks Chair MacArthur. It's exciting to think about planning in a different way. And I'm sure Esther is excited to think about putting together an actual travel schedule. We put everything on ice when we were ready to head out into John Day in May. And I know that was really sad too. It was, I think we had commissioners stepping off at that time too, and we weren't able to do an actual in-person kind of proper heralding of her long tenure, Commissioner Morrow. I really appreciate folks' focus on wildfire recovery. It is so easy if you're not right in it, like, Commissioners Warren, Jacobson, and probably others I'm missing. This year, fortunately, Central Oregon, I don't think was hit too hard, and Eastern escaped it as well, ironically. But and folks pointed out yesterday the information in the commission packet. The reason why we included that all staff presentation is because staff had given each other, the wildfire responding staff, the regional representatives had given all staff a briefing on that. And I just thought the information was so rich in terms of the work that had been accomplished and the work that is ongoing that we included it. I wouldn't necessarily include the PowerPoints from all staff generally, but that was just, the staff regional representative put that together in a short amount of time. And I just really appreciate their time taking away from their frontline job to help inform other DLCD staff of how deep a slog it is for communities going forth on this. It is very deep, as Commissioner Jacobson is saying, and Commissioner Warren can attest as well. And it is not going to go away in the near term. So it is years and years of rebuild and understanding how DLCD and LCDC have interfaced with your temporary rule. That'll be coming back in May. So you'll have an opportunity in May to discuss making that temporary rule permanent. John Jennings will be bringing that. But the other associated just efforts, they're extensive. So it really is a matter of reduction of what we do want to look at and focus on, because it is so tremendously extensive. But I completely endorse Commissioner Jacobson's recommendation to come out and see it on the ground. There's nothing like that, because otherwise it's almost just an affront of need and supply. So we look forward to working with you on and the local government representatives on what we should show and discuss and how to do that. I don't know, Commissioner Warren, if you want to say anything about kind of rebuilding efforts, but they just are so, it will, I hope that it will remain a commission theme for many years to come.
I mean, I'm happy to chime in a little bit. It's been a long, arduous process. I mean, calling it rebuilding is, I think, a little bit optimistic at this point. We're still in the cleanup portion.
Right.
Triage just ended not too long ago. Like Commissioner Jacobson said, there are still people living in hotels who struggle to find basic necessities. And so dealing with that has been a huge portion of this rebuild process, if we want to call it that. But things are looking up. They're getting cleanup is underway, and they're making progress quickly. And building permits are being issued, as well as demolition permits, of course. And I think that before too long, we'll start to see more actual structures being replaced. And I think that will help a lot with everyone's mood, because it's been a very long and drawn out process, and people are they're tired, and they're sick of having to look at it and be reminded every day. And so there's a lot of this frustration around when is it going to happen. And we're doing really well in comparison to other communities. We down here have been very active and motivated, and we're able to get the ball rolling very quickly compared to places like Paradise, California, for example. And I expect it's going to take years still. But I think once things get cleaned up, there will be a kind of a general sense of hope restored. So yeah, if anyone wants to come visit down here, you're more than welcome, and I'd be happy to show you around.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think I don't see any other hands up. I think that sort of completes our really good 2 days. I have thanks to staff for sort of right sizing the conversations timeframes, because it was a slower pace, which meant that we could actually have these robust conversations and really understand the topics. So I know that sometimes we don't have any other choice since we have time limits, because those housing meetings were really intense. But I think it was a better pace for me anyway. So thanks to staff for everything you've done to make this work, and thanks to my fellow commissioners who I really always learn something from you, and it's been a great couple of days.
Thank you for the breaks, Chair MacArthur. They are appreciated.
You're welcome. I think I got a gold star just for breaks, because I hit most of them, except for this current one that we're about to take for the next 2 months. So thanks, everybody, and have a good couple of months. See you in May.
So really quickly.
Yes.
We're all saying bye.
Go ahead. Yeah.
The training, the opening for training. Did we?
I think it is a different Zoom, Vice Chair Halofa. Okay. So we will conclude this meeting officially. Okay. Commission will not be in quorum. Right. There's just a few commissioners that we're supporting, and so Esther can resend that link to you if you'd like. If Esther,
maybe I didn't notice that.
Yeah, we just didn't want to have a public meeting.
No, that makes sense. No. I totally get that. I want to make sure not to get to know the information